Hi, I'm Dylan Paris. I'm a musician, video creator, primarily for videos about music and technology here on YouTube, as well as, tech stuff in my day job. Today I'm going to talk about the MC-707 from Roland compared to the Native Instruments Maschine Mk3. These two devices are interesting to compare because they have a lot of similarities, but in some ways it is an apples and oranges comparison. The biggest reason for this is that the MC-707 is a standalone device. All of the sounds inside the 707 are internal. It has its own internal components that allow it to process sound without a computer. The Maschine Mk3 is a hardware controller for PC or Mac software. This is a pretty substantial difference. So if your only need is standalone, and by standalone I don't necessarily mean internal battery power, but no computer, the 707 is the obvious answer. There's essentially no competition there. If you want a standalone device, then you should be looking at something like the MPC-1, the MPC Live, the Akai Force 707, or the far more expensive Maschine Plus, which just came out and is around $1,400, I believe. When the Maschine Plus was announced, it was immediately after I had already paid for my MC-707. I felt an instant ping of regret because the Maschine Plus seemed like a dream device to me. It has Native Instruments sounds built in, and Native Instruments plugins are my favorite synth sounds. They're all over my new album, There's Something Better, link below. And along with the Arturia V collection, they're my favorite sounds. However, the more I dug into the Maschine Plus, the more I realized it was fairly limited for the sounds I actually use. To date, it ships with Monarch, Massive, and FM8, as well as some additional side contact instruments. It is a cool device, but it is $1,400, and what you get for that is a standalone device with an Atom processor from Intel and 4 GB of RAM. So I think a lot of people are going to do a lot of amazing stuff with the Maschine Plus, but the Akai Force also launched at $1,400, and you can now find them for around $800 used on Reverb. I'm not sure how the used market will look with the Maschine because they're so strict about user licenses. Just look at the used market for the other Maschine controllers. It's very difficult to get one with a license, and that's why I bought my Mark III brand new, whereas I normally buy my gear used. So this is important to say because every single time I use the 707, and there are a couple of videos on my channel you can check out where I was using it, I was always comparing the sound quality to my PC sounds, which is not super fair. My PC, for example, is a custom-built desktop I made myself. It has a Ryzen 2600, 32 gigs of RAM, multiple SSDs in it. All of my music software is run off of an NVMe M.2 drive, and so it is a powerful machine for music production, as well as other stuff. The internals of the 707, I have to imagine, are not quite so powerful. That being said, it can produce some amazing sounds. The MC-707 has a huge 3,000 plus collection of presets, many of which are classic Roland sounds. However, I found that I ran into limitations in a couple of different ways. And the first one was polyphony. Now, by default, I believe every track is set to 4-note recorded polyphony, and you can increase that per track, but the machine as a whole has 128-note polyphony. The problem is that some of the best and most rich sounds on the device use more than one voice per note. I'm not a sound designer, and I don't have the exact in-depth specifications to explain this other than sometimes I would load maybe 3 or 4 or 5 tracks and I would already start to get voice cutting. That's when playing a note on one track starts to cut the notes out of another track. And I am the kind of producer who likes to layer. I understand that there's a beauty and an elegance and simplicity. Jack White makes some of the best sounding music I've ever heard with toy guitars. So I'm not here to say you couldn't do something amazing with the 707 at all. You totally can. It is a phenomenal device. However, I don't always benefit from limitations in the same way. I actually like the ability to be like, okay, I like this little loop I just made with MIDI. Let's just duplicate it and add another synth sound. Duplicate it, tweak it, add another synth sound, and start building almost an orchestra of synthesizers and plugins. And that is not the kind of workflow you're getting on the 707 if you're using some of the richest and most complex multi-voice sounds, right? And so for me, that became a pretty big limitation when I started to think about, well, how would I actually use this thing? Because I bought the 707 hoping that it could be both my at-home production device and an on-the-road, if there ever is an on-the-road again, performance device. Again, limitations can be inspiring. And maybe the solution for some folks will be to buy more gear, right? If you combined an MC-707 and an MPC-1, for example, that is still, I believe, especially if you buy them used, near or less than a Maschine Plus, and gives you way more tracks, way more sampling functionality, and could be great, I think, for a lot of people, but not really for me. You see, I just made an album. I'm really proud of it. I spent years making it, and almost all of it was composed in PCs and Macs using Ableton Live. And when I was using Ableton Live, I wasn't using a lot of the stock plugins. I was using Native Instruments Complete Collection and the Arturia V Collection, as well as a little bit of Serum. And those sounds are so rich, and the capabilities of a computer are so vast that when I started to make the journey into hardware, I was approaching it with a lot of bias. And I think that's important to keep in mind. If you're a producer who's been using gear forever and you don't like looking at screens and you don't like interacting with computers or VSTs, then I really think, even though I've only been using the Maschine Mk3 as a standalone device in that I don't use the screen. The only time I use the computer interface is to name files and save them before I start a new project. I don't interact with the software. I just use it as a standalone device, and I'll get to that. However, if you never want to touch a computer, then I think the MC-707 is phenomenal. From what I've seen in the Maschine Plus, it may be possible to get more power out of it, and the quality of the sounds, in my opinion, that you have access to with Massive, Monarch, and FM8, as well as some of the Contact Library stuff, sounds better. But better is subjective, right? I mean, a lot of people make some of the coolest sounding music I've ever heard on devices with way more limitations. People like Jay Hoskins can make any gear I've ever seen sound amazing. People like Jeremy, Red Means Recording, will take a device that I never considered to be studio quality and then make something better than most of the stuff I've ever made on this channel. And so all of that is to say that while I personally benefit from the expansive track and polyphony and sound quality of the Maschine Mk3, the trade-off is that it is connected to a computer. And when I look in the long term, if there ever is a future in which I can tour, I will probably have to buy a laptop to plug the Maschine in so that I can continue to use the sounds I'm using. That to me is worth it, but it is an additional cost, right? So the MC-707 is $1,000 MSRP currently in November 2020. I paid $750-ish before the deck saver on reverb.com when I bought it from Jeremy, Red Means Recording. And you can find a lot of them around the $800, $900 price range right now. The Maschine Mk3 was $650. I think it originally launched at $600, but it's $650 on the market now, at least in the US. You might think that that is a lot of money to pay for what is essentially a hardware controller when $100 more will get you a full standalone device. And I think that is an extremely valid opinion. Value is entirely subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder, it's in the eye of the purchaser. But I understand that, like, yes, if you were starting from nothing, then the idea of going Maschine and building a desktop or buying a laptop versus getting a MC-707 or an MPC-1 or an MPC Live even, I would totally understand not going the computer route. But I already had my desktop. So I already had the complete 12 standard collection. I already had the Arturia V collection. I already had all of these things that I could take advantage of the Maschine hardware. And that's really an important piece of contextual information, because that's not going to be the same for everyone. If you buy a Maschine Mk3 and you don't have the full complete and you don't have the V collection, you don't have necessarily the same reasons to buy it that I did. However, we should talk about the V collection and the complete 12 collection here on the Mk3, because the V collection utilizes the NKS, I don't know if it's an API, but it's essentially like a plugin standard that Native Instruments allows third parties to use. And what that means is that the sounds in the V collection are browsable and parameter matched to the knobs on the Mk3. So that's kind of wordy, but what that means is using the Mk3, any sound that I load up from the V collection, I can tweak as though it was a hardware synthesizer. I have the same tactile feeling as a standalone groove box, but I get the sonic richness and power of these emulations of classic hardware synthesizers. And that synergy, for lack of a better word, is really powerful and really cool for what I personally want to do with music production. I am not a die-hard old head gear guy. I have the utmost respect for those people because that world is so cool. I'm the kind of person that when I run into a wall with gear, I just get annoyed because I know how much more is possible with electronic music production on computers and even iPads, which I've been using for eons now. And so all of that is to say that for me personally, the power of the Maschine Mk3 combined with the hardware interface, the chord modes, the scales modes, the groupings, and to be clear, I'm a baby, I'm a beginner at this thing, but even now, at this point, I can tell it's the coolest device I've ever used. And I've used a lot of different devices this year, so it's totally possible I'll find some fatal flaw in the Maschine Mk3 and feel like I need to sell it and get something else. But I am pleasantly surprised by just how much I can do with it. And because it's using the same software, the same VST plugins that I'm already using when I'm making my albums and making my music outside of YouTube, I have a feeling that I can use it as both a sketch pad and a finalizing device. And when I'm ready, I can take scenes and ideas and turn them into fully arranged songs and then export them into Ableton for mixing and mastering and even potentially adding additional layers. And then when I want to go on the road, I can use scenes versions of these songs with performance effects and all these new things I still need to learn. And this is all before getting to sampling. I don't do a lot of sampling, primarily because I'm very afraid of the copyright hammer. I buy all of my plugins. It took years, but I own all of my music software outright with cash thanks to my jobs and thanks to heavy discounts during summer sales and Christmas sales. So sampling isn't a huge part of my workflow because I've approached music from a possibility perspective. And one of those possibilities is if any one of my songs ever were to somehow get popular, I would want to make sure that I was the sole copyright holder for every single element of that. It means I won't have to face a lawsuit in the future, or if I did, it would be a faulty one for the person accusing me because I know I've made all of my music. I don't even really use loops outside of the ones I compose myself using MIDI and VSTs. So that is just to say, if you have a very sample heavy workflow, then and I was asked this in my last Maschine video, I actually think if you don't want a laptop and you want to work with samples, an MPC 1 or an MPC Live seems to be your best option. If you really love the Ableton push style interface, then maybe an Akai Force. But again, the big caveat for me is I love sound quality. I'm obsessed with it. I love the richness and the dynamism of throwing a really good DX7, FM8, massive sound, and then layering Valhalla vintage reverb on it, and just hearing it just sounds expensive and it sounds good. And that is something that the Maschine does because it's essentially just a hardware interface for my computer that the MC-707 cannot touch. And that, along with the polyphony issues, was the biggest fatal flaw for me with the MC-707. Like I said earlier, I don't think limitations are inherently bad for people, but they are bad for me. I'm the kind of person who, if I have a really easy way to browse a lot of presets, again, looking at the 707 is kind of a downside here, the Mark III has really awesome browsing features. You can limit by sound type, by instrument type, by vibe even to a degree. And you can star your favorite presets, so then you can just filter by the ones you've favorited. These kinds of things mean that having thousands upon thousands of presets is a world of possibilities for me, not something to get lost in. On the MC-707 in its current configuration, which I believe is version 1.07 or 1.06, browsing presets is still pretty clunky and it doesn't have it's not the same kind of interface. You can filter by bass and synth and pad. In fact, I think you have to. You can't filter by just Juno sounds. You can filter by the sounds in Zencore sound packs, of which Jeremy left like 10 on my device, and those were really cool and really rich. But those are also the same sounds that then created the polyphony issues later down the line. For me, it all comes down to workflow, ease of use, and what the hardware does for me. And there is something about the Maschine Mk3. Like, I'm a beginner with Maschine. I'm a long-time computer hardware user, but I am a first-time Maschine user, and it just makes sense. The shift functionalities, the easy quantize, the easy undo. There's a metronome count-in, which is a feature that's just not on the MC-707. And it's something you can work around. What I would do is essentially, I would set the bar length for something and then let it play, and then play on top of that first loop. But on the Maschine, you just hit turn metronome on, which is like shift metronome, shift record is a count-in, and it doesn't matter how long you set the loop length. You just play what you want and then hit record again, and then you're good. You don't have to create and then set and then record. There are so many steps just removed, ripped away, that you don't have to worry about that are on the 707 that are not on the Mark III, that for me, again, a person who uses both standalone and computer-based hardware, who uses iPads, I consider myself fairly agnostic to this stuff, but the benefits of the Maschine compared to the MC-707 for me are massive. No pun intended. And so I highly recommend the Maschine Mark III. I am going to probably, and not just probably, I am selling the 707. I have a sentimental value to it because I bought it from Jeremy and I got to talk to Jeremy and he watched my video about it, and that was really, really cool. But that doesn't outweigh the need to recoup the cost of the Maschine and the sounds and the power and the workflow that I get out of it. So this is a fairly biased review, as most actually are, whether people admit it or not. But if you're looking for something standalone, the 707 wins, because the Maschine Mark III is not standalone. And I don't think you should pay 2 times the cost of a used MC-707 to get a Maschine Plus. I think the Maschine Plus is more powerful. I think the Maschine Plus gets all the benefits of this workflow and can be plugged into a computer, which is really cool. But there's a reason I did not buy a Plus. I bought a Mark III. That is a much more reasonable purchase for myself. And I knew I was mostly going to be using it plugged into software anyway, or plugged into my computer. If you have the V collection already, or if you're interested in the V collection, if you're interested in the power and the expandability of the complete collection, of the V collection, of what you can do with PC hardware, but you hate just looking at a screen and using a mouse, you just want a physical interface, a Groovebox style interface, Maschine Mark III. It's a no-brainer. I've really enjoyed it. My first video with the Maschine got way less views than my videos with the 707. I'm hopeful that my audience will follow me, but I understand that there's definitely a little bit more shine and excitement about the 707 than the 3-year-old Maschine Mark III. But I don't make my purchasing and workflow decisions around what I think the audience of YouTube is interested in today. I make my decisions around what will influence me the most to make the best content I can make. And so MC-707, really cool device. Would recommend it for standalone. That is a competitive field. The MPC line is very interesting. It's a different workflow. I had a live for a little while and it didn't really click with me, but I think if I'd given it a fair shot and fair time, I would have been able to make some really amazing stuff with it, and a lot of people do. But the Maschine Mark III, just wow. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm just so excited by this thing. And so yeah, I'm gonna keep making videos with it, keep making music with it. Like I said, my album recently came out, and a lot of the sounds I used on that album are sounds I now have access to on what feels like a standalone Groovebox, because I have like a 10-foot USB-B to USB-A cable. I turn on the Maschine software and then I turn off my screen, and I've just got a super beast powerful box. So yeah, thanks for watching. Consider liking and subscribing. If you're this far, I'm pretty sure you're probably one of the people who already does that. And so yeah, have a great day, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.